I'm Alexandra Kreis, and you're listening to Outer Travel Inner Journey. Today I'm sitting down with Kerstin Walsh, artist. Her specialty is dress portraits, currently in India. Hello, Kerstin. Thank you for coming to my podcast today. Kerstin
How are you?
Walsh. I'm good. I'm very good because I'm delighted to see you there in India in all this lovely
Finery.
makeup and getting a little bit of a vibe of India. This is so lovely to have. And yeah, I wanted to introduce you to my listeners first. So Kerstin is an artist and who uses visual art to help people explore their inner journeys, inspiring others and herself at the same time. Her interest in other people's lives is the focus for her work. So, and I know Kerstin has a very special project I've never seen, which is called the Dress Portrait, which means like you making photos of wedding dresses and then kind of bringing the story of the dress and the relationship into that picture. Is that right, Kerstin?
That's right. Yes, wedding dresses are one type of So I'll do any dress really, or any. Yeah. I've done a pair of shoes or so, but it's basically using a piece of clothing, a dress to build an image of a person or a couple.
Yeah, and their time together.
Yeah, and their time together, exactly.
And we are speaking today because you're back in India, and Kerstin is originally from Ireland, born into an Irish-German household. So already you got the influence of different cultures. So you feel probably more open-minded to engage with other cultures. I usually encounter that with people who have that perspective on life. And fascinating enough, you got married about 10 years ago in the same village, or in the village you are currently in, or were until yesterday. And so you had the opportunity to look at the rituals and everything again from an outside perspective. How did that go for you?
Oh, it was incredible, actually, because as I mentioned to you before, when I was doing I was absolutely in the dark. I said, I agreed to get married because it's extremely important here. And I said, look, let's do it. And then I gave myself into the hands of the Indian wedding machine.
And it's a wedding machine, yes.
So yes. So, and I remember, now I'm older and wiser, but back then I thought I might give my tuppence worth on maybe, what our wedding invitations would be, or not even what I was wearing, but I learned to just let go and let them do. And I did not know what was going to happen from one day to the next. I didn't even know how many days my wedding was going to be. I just went with it.
Yeah, that is some form of surrendering, obviously.
It sure is. Yes.
Because I got married recently, and that's also what we just spoke to in the preparation to this call. And I've been married late in my life, and so what I chose to make my wedding ceremony was more instigated by who I wanted to be and how I wanted it to look like, and more not dependent on the cultural background that we both are coming from, my husband and I. But when I hear you were young. What age were you, and how did you get dragged into the Indian wedding? I mean, to the outside world, it looks like, wow, she got married in an Indian village. That must be fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about the pros and cons?
I don't even know how old I was. I was early 30, 32, maybe 33. And I was I didn't have a dream of getting married, of having a dress and a party and all that kind of thing. I was more like, oh, I'm going to be free. And we'll live together. Very modern European outlook. Especially back then, marriage has come back into fashion a little bit more since then.
That's true.
So I thought, I struggled within myself, and I said, look, I'll just go through the door, and better going through the door than to stand outside the door thinking about which way to go. So I jumped in and went on a 3-month trip around the world with my twin sister in preparation. And then I learned as I went. Everybody did everything for me. I didn't even know what was going to happen in the mass part, which would be the part that I could relate to most. It was what I did have was I had a friend of my parents who was a priest, so he did part of the ceremony, and I do remember one of the Indian priests giving me a reading from the Bible that they wanted me to read, which was not according to my beliefs. As I sat on the stage. And I said, I'm sorry, but unfortunately I cannot read that. It had to do with men and women. So that was the one time I put my foot down. But for the rest of the time, I just let it wash over me. And it's funny that some of your wedding might have was Indian influenced, like the turmeric ceremonies. I wonder if I was doing something like that now, what I would do. But if I was organizing my own wedding, would I? Because the rituals are very strong, deep.
No,
I read somewhere that the length of a wedding is indicative of the investment of the community in that wedding. So that
you have a very long wedding, so to speak.
Long. Yes. But you have a long wedding. The whole community is involved, and that's basically a symbol that they are going to be supporting you to make it work. So
I heard something about like how
makes sense over here.
There is also symbols about like how big is the house that you're gonna give as a dowry, which kind of symbolizes how much you're gonna love that person. And marriage is a rite of passage, I think. Like we have very, very few indicators in our modern world where we talk about rite of passages, where we are being held accountable to make a transition. And when I think of Indian weddings, I think about exactly what happened to you, not being aware that it happened to you at the time because I was there, but this whole sense from a female perspective that you are being given away and that you're completely blind, stumbling through something. I'm sure the Indian girls know a little bit about like the wedding ceremonies, but it's almost like it feels when you say it like that, you're stumbling along, and at the same time it should be that moment in your life where you really light up and understand you have to go through this to come out as a mature, like as coming into a new part of your life, not just into maturity, but as a very important part of changing direction in life. Does that resonate with you?
And actually with the wedding, the wedding I was at this time around was much more, yeah, it was very clearly like that. So the bride was very young. She's 21.
Yeah.
And her mother, you know, yeah, is from a simple background and was very sure that she wanted her daughter to be married. She did do she's had some post school education, and she'll probably continue with that, but some of her friends would be, you know, taking more time to study. But in this case, mummy was definite that she wanted her, and so happy to have her daughter in safe hands. You know, and of course they're related, you know, it's all in the family.
Yeah.
And you know, these days, like, so she's young, so she's from the Instagram generation, you know, so new rituals have come in, so they do a pre-wedding video shoot.
Wow.
And photo shoot, where they basically, you know, it's like a little, you know, with the couple doing romantic things in romantic settings, you know. So it's really, you know, you can see that they're preparing the ground,
Yes.
you know, like getting them used to each other. And, you know, and somebody said, yeah, yes, she has a fantasy of her own wedding, you know. So this marriage ground was completely different for this girl than it was for me. You know, this is totally in her trajectory, in her fantasy, in her inner world. And she was very happy. She said it felt like the marriage took a day, you know. she could have gone on for, you know, doing these rituals. She just loved every minute of it. And then, you know, the last ritual was so they got married in a function hall, no, in a church, and then went to a function hall at his place. And then the next day, everyone came back to the village for another function and a party in her place. And then the next day, after the final ceremony of closing the fire, she gets taken to her new home. And that's where everyone started crying.
Yeah.
You know, and it was the first time I saw the real emotion, you know. And I think where we're in the West, it's just so different, you know. They let it out, you know. Everybody, my daughter, who's friends with her, you know, she was in the mother's arms sobbing, you know. Everyone was sobbing, and then it's let out, you know, the catharsis. And then she goes to live in somebody else's house with her
Wow.
mother-in-law. You know,
Yeah.
so
So
it's this coming of age thing is very strong. Yeah, where I think that probably, yeah, in the West, you know, it's in some ways we make life harder for ourselves
how
by
so? How do you think we do?
thinking, like, okay, so there's a few different ways of looking at it. I mean, so for her, like, it, in a way, they live in faith. So all of the ways that I read in the West to be less stressed about mindfulness and faith and being in the present moment, living in the now, these are all things that they are doing naturally. The village, people from the village are actually in that. They trust in God. She trusted that her mother would choose the right person. They trust how life unfolds, and they don't worry about the other stuff, you know. So
Yeah.
in a way, it's easier, you know. Like, it's a little bit like freedom, you know. Freedom requires responsibility, you know. And I suppose not everybody wants to be free.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
freedom is
Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. We have that
Yeah.
saying in my course, you know,
Now,
like we have that saying in my course, you know, are you disciplined enough to be free? And I also hear you saying, are you trusting enough to move into another phase of your life? Because what I hear from your perspective,
Yeah. Yeah.
is that we Westerners, in the Western world, we feel safe through the words of money and job and career and then love, romantic love. And so these are very substantial things, like things that are really steeped in duality. While when we are going into an inner journey, we are encountering things that are not so logical, not so add one and one together. I make this career, I get this job, I marry this man, this is going to be my house. This is all, this has blindsided us, so to that we are actually encountering also bigger phenomena in our lives. And if we don't do that, and if we just think they're empty rituals, that sounded also a little bit like what you thought, like, I'm a free woman and we can do this ritual, but it won't change me. It sounded like that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I totally know where this is coming from. I don't think you're the only person, the only woman, who thinks that way in this modern day of age. But it does change us, and it kind of ties us into different circumstances. And I'm so grateful that I had managed to awaken to that ritual and then go through it for myself. In that sense, you said that I used Indian ceremony backgrounds like mantras and nights before of fire ceremonies and shamanistic rituals. So it was a little bit of a mix, but more so in the invoking divine and seeking support from the outside, and just thinking, like, I'm loving this man, I'm going to go be with him, and everything around it doesn't matter. So having said that, if you could go back, what would you do? What would you do differently these days?
Yeah. So you're breaking up a little bit. You broke up there a little bit. What would I do differently?
What would you do differently, looking back now at, and also having seen a ritual like that from the outside? What would you wish for yourself?
Do you know what? I don't think I would do anything differently, actually. It'll be interesting. No, yeah, I wouldn't do anything differently. It was like me, I was looking for an adventure.
Yeah.
And I got an adventure. And and I mean, it's been such an integral part of my spiritual growth. I think being married, having children, even if you don't get married, being a couple changes you. I have friends who are still not married but are living in a unit, a domestic unit with children, and it brings up all of these questions about the roles of men and women, and economics, and how it all works, and domesticity, and all of that. So that's why the marriage, these things are still difficult. Because I'm an idealist and a dreamer, and I still want to be, I still feel free. Or I feel more free again. I felt very unfree. I felt very unfree for a long time, because of how society is, even in, or maybe it was because of how I am, I don't know, but just getting into this domestic unit. I was free for so long, and then when you have kids, you're not free, not like that anyway, so the journey continues.
What was your growth path in that? I see, like, it's is spirituality in the sense of you changing your point of view into more surrendering. I mean, you surrendered already to that ritual, not knowing what's going to come, or what does that mean to you? You've grown spiritually. and you've become more free? How did you?
I think I'm learning to what to surrender to and what not to surrender to, or what's important for me to fight for, and what's important for me to just go with and experience. And I surrendered completely to the needs of my children. How did I get there? There was a good bit of pain. But I got there. I mean, art, and thought, so in that way, it's like, if I look at the women in the village who are purely living from faith, they laugh at us when we put on our seatbelts, because if you're gonna die, you're gonna die. If God wants you to die, you're gonna die. Which is such a lovely way to be, but I wouldn't, I don't know how they are inside. I've seen a progression, of women. So I've seen the women who have had no education, and who, so the mother of this bride, who is purely village, village faith, ground earth tradition, and then the education comes, and you can have education, some people have education but stay in the village. Others are still in the village, but their minds are going, and they're thinking about, more like, questioning more. So there's the questioners over there, and there's the non-questioners, just like in the West.
So blind faith, I'm hearing you, what I'm hearing you say, if I might kind of sum that up. What I'm hearing you say is that, in my head, what was triggered was that in the Buddhist tradition, they say we are all suffering, because we are, the moment the mind comes into play, we are suffering. Can you not hear me anymore? Are we gone?
You're coming back, I think. I don't think I missed anything too important.
Okay.
So the minute we come into the mind, we are suffering. Yeah,
and so in order for us to change our minds, sometimes we need to suffer to leap into bigger pictures of what is truly important right now, and where we have to stick to our guns. That's what I'm hearing from what you said in your growth path, that pain is inevitable. And even though pain is often reserved for the artist, like a lot of, we've seen a lot of artists coming out and becoming famous. Picasso is one of the most famous one for his suffering and being seen and changing and creating new things. So suffering is something that makes us grow, which we often try to avoid. That's what I'm hearing you say, that it's a necessary part. From the outside view, I know when one is in suffering, it's not nice, certainly not, but at the same time, if we have enough, not faith, but also intellect, to start to distinguish what is right and not right at that very moment in time, what is where we can grow, what is that situation showing us, so we can grow from it. Then you said that, you used your mind as such, then your intellect is super important in the growth path. We say that in yoga. You can, you can faithfully follow a teacher forever, and they can transmit things onto you, and at the same, like you were transmitted into something through the priest, and you didn't know anything, and unless you're invoking your intelligence in the process after, you won't be seeing what you've been given. And so following just blindly a yoga practice is not the thing to do. I'm just comparing now from where I'm coming from. So that's what I heard when I heard you speaking about it.
it's, yeah, I mean, it's sometimes I feel like it I don't know if it's a progression from, you know, where you have this fundamental way of being and faith, like the mother of the bride, you know, and then think you start thinking, and you move through all of these things, and then you consciously choose the piece, you know, but you can't, it's, I don't know if it's a journey, but for me it's, I, you know, I wouldn't give up the pain, you know, I wouldn't give up the intellect, you know, I wouldn't give up the struggle, you know, and there's so many things that have helped me, you know, the art and all the reading and you know, meeting people, connecting with people like you know, conversations, you know, struggling with other people who are struggling the same way, you know. And it, you know, I think one of the things that comes out in the art is just that there are these paradoxes in life, and if you can learn to hold them both both sides, then your life isn't going to be that painful. You know, it's like it's a lesson that you have to learn, because there's no right or wrong.
Amen.
In a lot of things, and then
Amen.
there's
Yeah.
nuances in between, of course.
Amen. I love the picture of the oh, sorry. I think
the picture. Go on.
I love the picture of the paradoxes. You know, that's where I am. There is no yes or no, but there, if you can hold, in German we have this, because you speak German too, maybe some listeners do too, but we say like sowohl als auch. You know, there is not a yes or no, you know, but there is something that both things can exist. You know, there can be there can be joy in pain, and there can be pain in joy. And if we can hold that and not get eaten by one of those, then yeah, that's pretty big step.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. And to try and live in that place where they both exist as much as possible, but also then, you know, make your choices in your life that you have right now, you know, and kind of, yeah, on a personality level, you know, that's kind of the other story that's going on. And that's where all of these gender roles here and all the questions, you know, play out, because they're real, you know, but there is this wider thing, yeah, where everything is as it is.
So I always like to ask my lead guests, what is their tool to manage the currents between the outer navigations, outer travels, you know, like where we're seeking outside inspiration, but noticing inside something needs to change as well. So what's your favorite tool to navigate the two worlds? Like somebody said, she uses meditation to get there. Is there something that you use?
I mean, I use the creative process. So that's quite a wide thing, but I guess I feel I'm creating reality as I create, you know, a little bit as I create my images. You know, you have your materials, and you have your canvas, you have your limitations, you know, and within that, by making choices and by having, you know, seeing the world as you see it, and using your pen as you use it, you know, that's kind of how I'm creating my life, you know, and I suppose I'm trying to let go of, you know, past fears and all that kind of thing, you know, to really just, you know, yeah, live from that perspective that you're creating. And then when I meet people that I'm making art with, so, you know, I mentor people in their creative process, you know, or I talk to people about their story and then translate it into images. There's just this wonderful conversation going on all the time between, and then there's bits of poetry that come in, and bits of, you know, the books that I read, the kind of self discovery, you know, all the different books about every, you know, novels, whatever. It just, you know, you just put it all in this big melting pot, and that's what, you know, gives me the buzz, is bringing all these things together, and then making something beautiful out of it. And making something beautiful,
and also then leading other people. So maybe you want to introduce or invite people to your next project if you're intrigued. Also, Kerstin has a website, which we're going to mention in the comment below, which is kerstinwalsh.com. She is spelled Kerstin, and Walsh as a WALSH. So kerstinwalsh.com. And Kerstin, what is it you want to invite us to, maybe to participate with you and learn our own tools? Is there a project you want to introduce?
Is there a project? I'm most active on Instagram. So on Instagram, you can see that I have various different projects going. But to invite you, well, just come along and have a look at the dress portraits. You know, I just love to hear what people think. You know, as you say, I don't think anybody else is actually making work exactly like that, and I'm just really interested in people's stories. So whatever way you show up, you know, come and say hi.
And I think you are received with an open ear, because Kerstin comes from this diversity of, you know, multiple layers of culture. And so, I would be, I'm intrigued by all your projects, and I love working with you. And I love your kids project, where you kind of seeking out kids with talents to further them in their art. I think this is totally necessary these days, as our learning and observation shifts from writing into the visual. And so, you're at the forefront of that, I think, you know, with your projects for kids. Well, thank you again for coming and being my guest on How to Travel.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
And I hope I'll see you soon, I hope.
I do hope so. In real life.
Absolutely.
Safe travels, Kerstin. And
thank you.
My listeners,
you too.
Forget to tune in to our next session. If you enjoy listening to my podcast, please consider to become a patron at patreon.com/Alexandra Kreis and pledge your donation.